Helldiver 13571 was on fire. And it was fine. Reginald here. So I've kind of been taking a snooze on Helldivers for the same reason most people are. We've been there, done that. I do have a certain love for the game, but the problems have metastasized and the solutions have been slow in coming. Not least because I think there's a vision for the game that doesn't entirely jive with what the players really want to be able to do. You can't really fight the enemy. I mean, you can, but it's a super suboptimal and inadvisable approach. The game really heavily incentivizes not engaging with the enemy or running away. I want to try and fix all of these problems by making some suggestions, so bear with me while I set up the argument. In an attempt to dig up the bottom of this problem, I spoke with several people on the subject of why Helldivers doesn't feel fun to play, and the response was largely a consensus on this point. Fighting is a bad idea. To drive that point even further home, if we reference some of my most useful, popular, and successful advice from the perspective of gameplay wins, and just reframe it a bit, the correct way to play is not to engage, to throw your stratagems and run away. In most games with combat, a lot of the fun is in the combat itself, holding W and getting into the fray. Sure, you may need to reposition, but you can take and win a square fight some of the time. In Get the Hell Away From Me Divers, it's a hold S, always be running away. A square fight is a losing fight. This is why the railgun nerf from way back when was such a negative for the game's longevity. And I certainly didn't see it before, but I feel like I get it now. That was the one gun you could use to actually fight, like really fight, like dig in and do a little war. Now half the toys I pull out of the toolbox feel like they're barely able to kill the enemy in half a magazine. So here we are. The patch was 2 days ago, and the warbond was today. And I booted it up to screw around and try some of the new stuff, and my entire impression playing today was, I'm just having so little fun right now. They literally nerfed the flamers 2 days before they dropped the flamethrower warbond. I think that says almost everything that needs to be said, but hey, let's go a little harder. This game desperately lacks the ability to engage in conflict. My weapons are generally a bit clunky and fiddly, with staged reloads that to this day still fail to load bullets after the audio cue for a racked bolt and animation is complete, and eats that will totally shoulder and aim but not fire, just for fun. I have latency in my aiming, which, like, yeah, you get used to that mechanic and all, but then you have to hit weak spots all game long or practically do no damage with your primary or secondary as a general rule. Hell, you have to hit weak spots with your anti-tank weaponry too. I mean, Jesus Christ. I know the weak spot is technically the leg on the charger, but I blasted this thing in the face with 2 anti-tank rockets and it didn't die. My first thought after coming back to Helldivers after a while wasn't like, oh yeah, I gotta pick my hit zones better. It was like, why is my gear so garbage? I just want to kill things I shoot at. There's like 5 of these dudes running around. This is a bug breach, and my eat has like a 1-minute cooldown. There's plenty of enemies on screen, but you can only hit a few at a time, and generally cannot penetrate through even corpses, and only if you die per reload. Unless you bring the right guns and stratagems, you're really not an effective fighter in and of it yourself. It's fully possible for you to bring the wrong loadout that just gets hard gated by enemy armor. Absolutely no way to deal with those threats, meaning some weapons are literal must picks and others are just dumpster tier. But then your support weapons have limited ammo and often take multiple hits to kill individual targets anyway, so you can get in this situation where you're just running around playing keep away from the big scary bug or bot until your actual weapons finally come off cooldowns, because the ones you have on your person when you respawn aren't able to deal effective damage to most key targets. We temporarily had one that could, but they nuked that bad boy, so we're back to no weapon diversity, which just keeps happening with Helldivers. We keep getting our weapon diversity nerfed right out of the game. Yes, I know with enough skill and the right team and running away a bunch, you can play with anything you want, even the MGs, the light stalwart, whatever. You can do that. I've done it. But if you want to have a truly fun time and feel like an effective fighter, it's anti-tank support or bust. And oh yeah, I hope you enjoy being ragdolled because we added a lot more of that this patch. And that rant leads me into a different rant. This game lacks depth, real depth, mechanical depth that a player can express skill in. I so rarely feel cool when I play this game. Like 9 times out of 10, I feel like I called in a cinematic from space and that was really cool, but I didn't do anything. This is why I keep running the Senator, because at least the odd snap headshot kill or bird kill or whatever makes me feel kind of like a legend. There are technical skills in tactics, positioning, and teamwork, and I've covered some of that. There's never a moment where I am standing stalwart behind a piece of terrain, slaying the horde as it comes in to slay my buddy. Instead, I am just playing a game of lethal tag, running in circles and hoping there aren't any inaudible chargers about to jump scare me. Let me just reiterate the point even harder. You ever play one of those extermination missions? You know, the defense mission where you have to hold a position as the enemies wave in. How are they played when the game first launched? A bunch of mortar turrets. You basically hid from the enemy and let the turrets sort it out. How are they played now? You hide on a piece of terrain and chuck artillery strikes down until all the enemies are dead. You don't fight the enemies, you let the enemies die on your stratagems. Okay, thanks for your patience while I tried to make those points. I hope I've at least set the stage properly for the things that are bothering me. I know this is a generally well understood topic at this point, but my objective now is to try and highlight what could be done to fix these issues. So let's cover some bullet points. I think we need to significantly increase all weapon damage and effectiveness against enemies. Hear me out. The enemy has many ways to slap my nugs almost instantly, but I have to spend half a mag to queue a few morons sometimes, and it just makes most of my guns feel like a waste of space in my inventory. So if we increase the damage all of our weapons do and make it possible for me to engage more threats in a given engagement, I will have more fun on higher level games where there's a lot of enemies and I get to fight them all. My general impression of this game is that it's a horde shooter with an extraction mechanic, but the horde shooter part is what's missing. I don't want to shoot the hordes because they will summon more hordes, and that will make things harder because I can't kill them fast enough most of the time. Okay, next up, I want to give certain enemies visual and audio tells that indicate their intent to fire or attack. We do get this on turrets and tanks on bots, but I'd like to see a bit more of this in general. Chargers and Bile Titans need to be more audible alongside some kind of tell cue for when they are about to attack, and I mean their melee attacks. I need to hear something. Darktide, a game I play also, handles this with like a whoosh noise that you can hear an incoming attack from. But I should be able to maneuver based on their sound in general, so like at least make it audible when they're stomping up to me. Most of the time I can't hear it over everything else that's going on. It's far too quiet. Incoming rocket fire and heavy devastator fire should have some kind of red flash before they fire so that I can dodge out of the way. I know rocket devs do set up a little bit, but when there's a lot of stuff going on, it's impossible to keep track of all those little visual things from multiple difficult ranges. I'd like to see a little flash like it happens in Darktide just to give me a sense that I need to move or deal with my positioning better. Striders probably need this too, especially with their guns dealing as much spike damage as they often do. Number 3, let's finally make stealth real with silenced weaponry that lets me kill my way into a base unseen. I'm tired of shooting one guy and watching the whole base alert up and then do weird stuff like the second I pop up behind a rock, they're looking right at me. Stop letting the enemies do whatever this thing is. Give the player more time to stop call-ins for bugs and bots. I really hate when I'm trying to kill a small patrol of enemies and I'm doing a great job and then like the last guy in the group while I'm still reloading or whatever immediately calls in. Or heck, with bugs oftentimes I start shooting and they immediately do a call in. I don't even have time to react. I'd like to look for a way to make call-ins from enemies less of a snowball so that I can fight, clear, and move. I'm not saying that should always be the case, and yes, as the game gets more progressed towards the end of the game, I'd like to see call-ins be more dangerous, but earlier on, it's just so crazy how much they can snowball and eat up a bunch of your time when you're trying to accomplish objectives. It should be much more possible for you to defeat that call-in and maneuver. I'd also like to ameliorate some of these problems by making light enemies more numerous and heavier enemies less numerous. Fewer devastators and more infantry, and in games where this has happened, are a lot more fun. I get to shoot my guns a lot, and I enjoy that, and it feels more like I'm playing a horde shooter where the enemies are around. To that point, if we're going to be doing more light enemies, I'd like to see them be individually a little bit more dangerous, as well as have new types of them that are a little bit more dangerous, so that I have something to prioritize against other heavier targets, and this would allow my primary and secondary to have something to do all game rather than just sit at the back of my inventory while I fire my support and stratagems and run away. Honestly, the most fun many of the people I talk to have had is assaulting and holding an enemy base against waves of lighter enemies, but then 5 or 8 big enemies stack up and it's usually just time to leave. Combined with my suggestion on item 6, we could get a slower enemy dump ramping and more interesting lighter enemies that could give us something to fight. That combination could allow our basic primary weapons to feel better, as well as maybe some damage bumps on those so that we're a little more lethal as we're fighting and the enemy is still just as lethal as they are. The other idea and final idea I have is really centered around making your weapons more interesting. Ultimately, in this game with ranged weapons, there needs to be interesting mechanics to play with. On launch, the Eruptor had this fabulous fragmentation setup where you could get these directional fragmentation and use that to really interesting results, but they got rid of that. That was a mistake. Fragmentation from the Eruptor was one of the more interesting things about it. It gave me directional damage opportunities to fire damage around corners and deal surprise spikes to enemies that I wanted to kill. I really liked that, and getting rid of it was a huge mistake. The easiest way to deal with the crossbow problem is not to continue to make it like one-handed or whatever, over. It's to give it an actual AoE for damage so that when I shoot near an enemy, I deal damage to them. If I don't have to get direct hits with my funny bow and in fact can just lob shots more like a piece of artillery, that's interest that I've got. In an earlier video on Helldivers, I made a suggestion to make the break action shotgun able to be fired with different types of ammunition in each barrel, so you could do kind of ammo combos. Ideas like this, ideas that have been removed from the game previously, for example, like the Eruptor, give weapons more life. Weapons should have weird mechanics to experiment and play with. That will provide a way to express skill in the weapon that you can then, clip and send to your friends or just joke around about with your bros. That's what's missing right now from the combat, at least on that most basic mechanical level. All right, so I've listed out all my proposed fixes. Let me just sort of give you a vision for what the result of these fixes would be like so that we can kind of all align on what this would be like. Ideally, when you go and see a group of enemies, there is a realistic chance that you would want to take a fight most of the time, say 70% of the time. I'm not saying you will never be incentivized to run away or take it stealthy, but rather that it's fully reasonable for you to approach a base or a patrol or a group of enemies with the express intent of fighting them and even fighting the drop they call in. Then we add some more interest to the weapons so that when you're fighting them, there's more individual skill expression. I also want to see fewer heavy units and more light units in order to make it easier for the game to be balanced around actually being forced to land key weak spot hits with your various anti-tank weaponry. It's totally fine if my anti-tank weaponry requires a bit of skill to use. That's in fact preferable. But if we're going to have to make it so fiddly to hit these shots, then I can't have 9 of them at the same time. I have to have 1 or 2 of them that are very difficult to deal with and dangerous and maybe take some time, but I have to be able to bring the tools to the table as well that can do that. So I want the enemy to be scary, but I also want to be scary myself. Basically, I want fighting the enemy to be as viable a tactic as running away from them in this game. And that's really where the game is struggling right now. And this is especially important for more casual players who are in the typical, like, I want to go solo queue or queue up with a couple of my buddies and go get a 4-man going and go fight stuff for a while kind of category. I am aware that there is a small audience of people who could play this game at a very high level. I'm probably one of them, and some of these changes may actually make the game too easy for those people, maybe even myself included again. But I don't really care, because what matters is this game needs to be fun first and foremost, and it needs to be focused on being fun for everybody involved and for the largest bulk of people involved, and my suggestions are tailored to that. With that, thank you all so much for visiting. I really appreciate your time, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this balance issue for Helldivers. I know the thing that I mostly have done for Helldivers is just make tutorials on weapons, but I'm not feeling particularly enthusiastic about that because every time weapons come out, I just feel stymied by the lack of diversity of kit. I just don't have anything that I'm interested and excited to play. All these flamer weapons got nerfed right away. There wasn't a real big interest for me in just like another weapon that can kind of kill like basic tier bugs. Who cares? I'm just gonna spend all of my time on the few support weapons that are good. Anyway, thanks for your patience with me if I ruined one of your games. I was kind of experimenting being over aggressive and seeing how bad it would go, and it went bad. I didn't have a lot of fun playing the game really at all. I will be keeping an eye out for other updates for Helldivers, of course, because I still think it's a great game at its core, and I'm looking forward to the Illuminids whenever they come out. So I'll be back, and I'll be back to talk about some more cerebral topics, no doubt. But for the moment, I think I've said my piece, and I will see you around. Bye-bye.